Bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'être avec nous ce soir. Le ministre Leblanc et moi venons de terminer une rencontre très productive avec les premiers ministres, notre 23e depuis le début de la pandémie. La rencontre d'aujourd'hui nous a donné l'occasion de parler de notre travail commun pour lutter contre la pandémie et de ce qu'on fait pour aider les Canadiens et les entreprises canadiennes durant cette crise. Job one remains keeping people safe. This has been our government's focus right from the start of the pandemic. That's why today we started our meeting with a presentation about vaccine rollout from Dr. Tam, Major General Fortin, and President Stewart of the Public Health Agency. In just a few moments, Dr. Tam and Major General Fortin will provide more details about what they presented to the premiers. Yesterday, Health Canada approved the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine as safe and effective. We now have a green light on getting shipments delivered and vaccines out to Canadians. The first 30,000 doses are expected to arrive on Canadian soil in just a few days. To all Canadians, if you're feeling relieved and hopeful, you're not alone. This is the good news we all needed. But remember, this is only the first step in what would be a massive project over a long winter. I announced to the premiers that the federal government will be covering the cost of these vaccines, as well as the supplies needed to administer them. Not only will doses be free for Canadians, but provinces and territories won't have to use their funding to pay for this vaccine. J'ai annoncé au Premier ministre que le gouvernement fédéral va couvrir le coût des vaccins, ainsi que le matériel nécessaire pour les administrer. Les doses seront gratuites pour les Canadiens et les provinces et territoires n'auront pas à puiser dans leurs fonds pour les payer non plus. Déjà, l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada ainsi que Pfizer et les provinces et les territoires travaillent ensemble pour finaliser la préparation des 14 sites de vaccination. Notre gouvernement renforce également les systèmes de TI de l'Agence de la santé publique. La nouvelle plateforme de TI de gestion nationale du vaccin s'ajoutera au système existant pour assurer une gestion rapide et efficace du déploiement du vaccin à travers le pays. Comme je l'ai dit au Premier ministre, dans les semaines et les mois qui viendront, il sera essentiel de continuer à travailler ensemble. On s'apprête à déployer une campagne d'immunisation sans précédent, mais j'ai confiance en notre savoir-faire et je sais que notre plan est solide. Vaccines are safe and effective. Serious side effects are incredibly rare. In the very unlikely event of an adverse reaction, though, we want to make sure that Canadians have fair access to support. So today, I can announce that we're creating a federal support program around vaccine safety for all Canadians and for all vaccines. This includes COVID-19 vaccines that will be rolled out soon. This program is based on the model Quebec has had in place for the last 30 years and follows the lead of all other G7 countries. Today, the premiers and I discussed what else we need to do while we roll out vaccines. The federal government has already covered the cost of billions of pieces of PPE and millions of rapid tests that we've sent to the provinces and territories. We've also provided tens of billions of dollars in funding to the provinces and territories, including through the Safe Restart Agreement and the Safe Return to Class Fund. This money is for everything from strengthening healthcare to improving ventilation in schools. 8 out of every $10 spent to protect and support Canadians through this crisis has been spent by the federal government. And as I've said to the premiers at our previous meetings, we will continue to work with them to ensure that this help gets to the people who need it. Notre préoccupation est toujours d'assurer la sécurité des Canadiens, de veiller à ce que les gens de la classe moyenne et ceux qui travaillent fort pour s'y joindre reçoivent le soutien dont ils ont besoin et de jeter les bases qui vont permettre à notre économie de revenir plus forte que jamais. Enfin, durant notre rencontre, les premiers ministres et moi avons parlé du financement des soins de santé. À chaque semaine, de nouveaux records de cas de COVID-19 sont atteints. Dans de nombreuses régions du pays, les lits d'hôpitaux sont remplis au maximum, ou presque. Notre gouvernement a déjà investi dans le personnel de soins de santé et dans un soutien accru au système de santé. Notre priorité est de veiller à ce que tout le monde puisse continuer de compter sur des soins efficaces et de qualité au moment et à l'endroit où ils en ont besoin. Comme je l'ai dit au Premier ministre, je sais que les derniers mois ont été très difficiles pour tout le monde. On a eu une très bonne conversation et j'ai proposé plusieurs étapes concrètes pour la suite. Nous reconnaissons à quel point nos aînés ont énormément d'inquiétudes par rapport aux soins de longue durée. Et donc, nous avons proposé plus de ressources et de travailler avec les provinces pour assurer les meilleures pratiques et de l'aide à nos aînés. On espère pouvoir travailler avec eux dans les semaines et les mois à venir pour livrer concrètement pour nos aînés d'ici peu. Nous avons parlé du coût des médicaments qui est en train d'augmenter à travers le pays, les préoccupations que les gens par rapport à l'assurance médicaments. Nous avons souligné que nous travaillons déjà pour réduire les coûts des médicaments, mais que nous serons très ouverts à travailler avec les provinces qui sont prêtes sur des régimes d'assurance médicaments encore plus fortes pour aider les gens tout de suite. On a parlé de l'importance de partager des données et de regarder le virage numérique qui se passe à travers nos systèmes de santé et de répondre aux soins virtuels qui sont de plus en plus fréquents. On a proposé de travailler en étroite collaboration avec les provinces sur ces enjeux pour s'assurer que d'un bout à l'autre du pays, on ait des opportunités de livrer un meilleur système de soins de santé. Oui, on a aussi parlé du financement à long terme des soins de santé. Et je me suis engagé aux provinces que le fédéral va augmenter sa part des coûts de notre système de santé. C'est une discussion que j'ai bien hâte à avoir avec eux pendant les mois à venir. Le premier ministre Legault a proposé que nos responsables dans les ministres des Finances travaillent pour se mettre d'accord sur l'encadrement de les prochaines étapes. Mais j'ai bien hâte de continuer de travailler avec les provinces pour livrer un meilleur système de santé pour tous les Canadiens pour les années à venir. On a aussi proposé de commencer à travailler déjà sur les apprentissages qu'on a eus pendant cette pandémie pour améliorer nos systèmes de soins de santé publique. On reconnaît que beaucoup de ce qu'on a fait pendant cette pandémie a été basé sur des apprentissages pris il y a 20 ans pendant la période de la SRAS à Toronto. Et donc, on devrait commencer déjà à apprendre de ce qu'on est en train de vivre maintenant. Et évidemment, on s'est engagé de continuer à collaborer étroitement avec les premiers ministres. C'était notre 23e rencontre. On va continuer d'avoir des rencontres régulièrement dans les semaines et les mois à venir pour parler de tous les enjeux qui sont importants pour les Canadiens, y compris, surtout, la livraison des vaccins à travers le pays. Ça a été une très bonne rencontre et il y a beaucoup d'étapes concrètes sur lesquelles j'espère qu'on va pouvoir commencer à travailler ensemble. I proposed many concrete steps during our meeting on the work with the premiers moving forward. First of all, we all recognized how important it is to support seniors during this pandemic. The challenges that have been laid bare in our long-term care homes requires more resources and more work together to deliver for our seniors who are worried and families who are worried about them. So I proposed moving forward with the provinces on sharing best practices and delivering new federal resources to ensure that our seniors are best protected. And I certainly hope to work with the premiers on that in the coming weeks. We also made commitments to move forward on pharmacare. We've already made commitments on high-cost prescription drugs. We've made commitments on working on a national formulary, and I look forward to working with premiers who are ready on a universal pharmacare system that can make a huge difference when Canadians are worried about pharmacare, about vaccines, about that side of healthcare. We made a commitment to work together on that. We know that collection of data and digital transformation of our healthcare systems is increasingly important, and collaboration between different regions and jurisdictions is going to be important in order to deliver the best modern healthcare, including virtual care, to Canadians necessary. And there is much we can do to collaborate on that, and I look forward to working with the provinces and territories on better use of technology and better coordination of data. We also talked about long-term healthcare system funding. It's going to be important that the federal government, as I said, steps up and increases its share of the costs of healthcare with the Canada Health transfers. We are going to do that, and I look forward to conversations over the coming months about how we can increase it. Of course, our focus remains right now getting through this pandemic, and as I said multiple times to the premiers, we will be there to support them with extra healthcare costs linked to this pandemic, whatever it takes, for as long as this pandemic lasts. We also need to take lessons on public health from what was happening through this pandemic. We talked about the lessons we learned from SARS 20 years ago that were applicable during this pandemic, and how we should already start collecting best practices and looking what public health agencies have learned during this pandemic to make sure we are ready for whatever the universe throws our way in the coming years or decades. And of course, we committed to continual ongoing First Ministers collaboration. This was our 23rd First Ministers meeting, and I, of course, committed to continuing to meet with them regularly to talk about the things that matter to Canadians, from our healthcare systems to the rollout of vaccines that obviously
across South Asia. And let's discuss that what the Paris Agreement has been done, what happened with the Paris Agreement in the last 5 years, and so with that background, let me go over to first Ulka. Ulka, and I will be going to the same question. My question is very clear. When 2015, 12 December happened, the landmark Paris Agreement, the expectation that you had at that point of time, and 5 years down the line, that great evening in Paris, that expectation that you had at that point of time, and now sitting in 2020, 12 December or around, what do you feel? Is your hope being belied, or you think that we are in the right direction? Ulka.
Thank you so much. That's a terrific process.
I'm across South Asia, and let us discuss that what the Paris Agreement has been done, what happened with the Paris Agreement in the last 5 years, and what we expect. Before I start with Ulka, let me remind you what Greta Thunberg has said recently about the Paris Agreement. That may be a good pointer to start with, and let me kind of take you through that, and then we'll be having the questions.
if we all pull together and support each other to do what needs to be done. So today I am asking all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to be kind. Keep your words positive and supportive. We are trying to understand how the COVID-19 virus has spread within Harbour Breton. Think of how uncertain and anxious people there must be feeling right now. Think about how you would be feeling if this was happening in your community. Think about how you would want to be treated in the same situation. Vilifying a community or the people who live there is not helpful, necessary, or kind. In fact, it can be distinctly unhelpful. We need people to feel it is safe to come forward for testing. If they feel they will be shamed on social media, they will be reluctant to do so, and COVID will go undetected and spread in our communities. I think we can all agree this is not what we want. To those who have posted messages of love and support for Harbour Breton, thank you. This is what any community in this situation needs, so keep them coming. Let's all let Harbour Breton know.
The 5 years following the Paris Agreement have been the 5 hottest years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more than 200 gigatons of CO2. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years following the Paris Agreement, but the action needed is still nowhere in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years are in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding. Since then, a lot has happened. But the action needed is still nowhere in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years following the Paris Agreement have been the 5 hottest years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more than 200 gigatons of CO2. Commitments years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more to safeguard future living conditions. Since then, a lot has happened. But the action needed is still. My name is Greta Thunberg, and I'm inviting you to be a part of the solution. 5 years ago, world leaders signed the Paris Agreement, and they promised to keep the global average temperature rise. My name is Greta Thunberg, and I'm inviting you. My name is
Welcome to South Asian Environment Dialogue. You know that this program every Sunday is being aired by the Climate Channel, a Canadian. Welcome to South Asian Environment Dialogue. You know that this program every Sunday is being aired by the Climate Channel, a Canadian television channel, in collaboration with the Plurals, the media platform. And this is a unique platform in the sense that I think today we are going to have the 10th episode. We discuss a range of issues on environment and climate change in this particular program. And for the last at least 4 or 5 weeks, we are discussing climate change, simply because this is the time when all of you are supposed to be in COP. All of us are supposed to be in COP, but this year, due to COVID and all, we are not going to have the COP. So we in Climate Channel and the Plurals thought this is a good opportunity for us to ensure that let us discuss the outstanding issues of climate change, the negotiation, the finance and everything, and that we have been doing for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And now today, what we are going to do, we are going to talk about the Paris Agreement and thereafter. We call today's program An Evening in Paris and Thereafter. So we all have seen that in Evening in Paris, a famous film in the film, and now we will be discussing thereafter. So we all were there in the 12th December 2015, and we saw what has happened there. And now we will be trying to track in this program what has happened over the last 5 years and what you expect in the next years to come, with the Glasgow in 2021 being scheduled, what is going to happen. So let me first introduce the panel for you. I think it's a wonderful panel we have today. I have with me Ulka Kelkar, Director Climate Program, WRI India. Thank you, Ulka, for making your time and being here. We are having with me Manjit Dhakal, Head of the Least Developed Countries, the LDC support team at the Climate Analytics, and also the advisor to the chair of the LDC group. Thank you, Manjit. We are having Ranga Pallawala from Sri Lanka. Manjit is from Nepal, and Ulka, as I said, from India. Ranga Pallawala. Ranga is the National Climate Finance Advisor for the Commonwealth Finance Account Hub. I think I got it right. And also, he was previously advisor to the Sri Lanka and a regular, I think, the delegation member. I think we bumped into each other in COPs, and is a regular delegation member for Sri Lanka. He's from Sri Lanka as well. And we have in today's program is Farah Kabir. Farah is the country director, Action at Bangladesh. So that's the team, I think, a wonderful team across South Asia. And let us discuss that what the Paris Agreement has been done, what happened with the Paris Agreement in the last 5 years, and what we expect. Before I start with Ulka, let me remind you what Greta Thunberg has said recently about the Paris Agreement. That may be a good pointer to start with. And let me kind of take you through that. And then we'll be having the questions.
Greta Thunberg, and I'm inviting you to be a part of the solution. 5 years ago, world leaders signed the Paris Agreement, and they promised to keep the global average temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue 1.5 degrees to safeguard future living conditions. Since then, a lot has happened. But the action needed is still nowhere in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years following the Paris Agreement have been the 5 hottest years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more than 200 gigatons of CO2. Commitments are being made, distant hypothetical targets are being set, and big speeches are being given. Yet, when it comes to the immediate action we need, we are still in a state of complete denial, as we waste our time creating new loopholes with empty words and creative accounting. If you read through the current best available science, you realize that the climate and ecological crisis cannot be solved without system change. That's no longer an opinion.
As you see, Greta said that empty words don't make much of a sense. She said that after Paris, we had 5 hottest years. And also very importantly, she said that we are perhaps speeding in the wrong direction. That's a very, very interesting word, the wrong direction. We are speeding in the wrong direction. There is one theory that we are moving towards the right direction, but maybe at a very slow speed. And Greta is saying that we are going the wrong direction. So with that background, let me go over to first Ulka. Ulka, and I will be going to the same question. My question is very clear. When 2015, 12 December happened, the landmark Paris Agreement, the expectation that you had at that point of time, and 5 years down the line, that great evening in Paris, that expectation that you had at that point of time, and now sitting in 2020, 12 December or around, what do you feel? Is your hope being belied, or you think that we are in the right direction? Ulka.
Thank you so much. That's a terrific question and a very nice way of putting it, especially with the way you framed it, that are we proceeding slowly in the right direction or very fast in the wrong direction? Surely both cannot be the case. It must be one or the other.
Absolutely.
So my brand of cautious optimism is that we are proceeding slowly in the right direction.
Okay.
In the last 5 years, I think the progress has been slow. In fact, it has really picked up only in the last 2 or 3 months. If you see the kind of momentum that has suddenly been generated, contrary to expectations, because COP26, as you know, is not being held this year. It has been postponed by a year. Coronavirus pandemic has disrupted all normal discussions and in fact put economic recovery front and center of everyone's agenda. So I would say, belying all expectations, we are having some slow progress. I will just say one thing, which is that the Paris Agreement had built into it this concept of ratcheting up every 5 years. So in some sense, there was this expectation that there will be a period of gaining experience, of gaining trust, of letting the market economies of scale play out, some new technologies becoming commercialized, and then maybe 5 years later, we will be in a position to accelerate. So I would say that moment has come, but now we need to accelerate further.
Okay.
And yeah, so let me just pause there.
We'll be discussing that with whether that acceleration being kind of dragged back by the COVID and all. But let us go to Manjit. Manjit, what's your take on that? Very quickly, then we'll come to the details, responses that 2015, 12 December, and today in 2020, What your expectation? Your expectation has been online or it's not, Manjit?
I agree with Ulka. I think it's the same context. There are progress being made. Obviously slow, not as per the expectation, but also I think we have to be mindful. In most of the cases, we are only seeing the announcement. Making announcement is easy. Implementing them is difficult. And as I have been saying, in the kind of political context that we are, the domestic politics that we all have in many of our countries, one government make an announcement, they come up with some interesting thing, and when there is another government, will they take a same level of ownership? So I think it's very important in terms of the continuity, in terms of taking forward the legacy. But I think in the same context, we also have to be mindful of the diversity that we have among the countries, the context that had changed from long ago till now, and then, but to take your words, in a recent month, it's really appreciating to see a lot of countries making a long-term announcement, taking forward the world at least towards the reach of what has been agreed in the Paris. There is a report by UNEP recently in terms of the emission gap that will take us towards a 3 degree, not enough. With a different methodology, Climate Action Tracker came up with a report that in terms of the net zero emission, seems like the world will be heading towards 2.1 degree. But these are the long-term targets. We need something to happen immediately by 2030. So I think real action is still missing, and the role of the civil society, the role of the media to make government and other actors responsible is key in the coming days.
Absolutely. I think we'll come to that. You mentioned about the UNEP report of emission gap. We'll come to that. But let us first take this to a question to rest of the panelists. First to Ranga. Ranga, you are a finance man, and you know this COVID, how it is impacting the finance. And I think Ulka has made a very interesting point that despite the COVID in place, and I think a bit of an not really on the expected line, a lot of countries are kind of announcing long-term zero emission targets and a lot of things. And Manjit very interestingly pointed out that it's easy to make announcement. So how you take that? What really prompted the country suddenly in this mid of COVID to come up with this kind of announcement? Is it by design or by default, or what it is actually? Ranga.
Before I answer that direct question, I'll go to the comment for the first question. What I feel about the Paris Agreement since after 5 years. I look at it as a half filled or half empty glass situation.
Absolutely.
One can see many of the positive sides, and one can see many of the negative sides as well. But I would like to highlight few of the positive sides. I will compare Paris Agreement with the Kyoto Protocol. And what we have seen after the Paris Agreement being agreed at the COP in Paris, we have seen the fastest ever protocol that been enforced, came into the enforcement, because many countries have ratified it, in a record time.
It's a record time. Let me put it that 12 December 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, and the ratification happened 4th November 2016. So that is one of the quickest ratification of any agreement, global agreement. Yes, that's it.
So I think that's something very positive, isn't it? So we have enforced Paris Agreement, and even after a few years, we have seen that the United States wanted to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Yes. And everybody expected that we will go back to the situation where we ended up with the Kyoto Protocol. But what happened is completely a different situation, where the momentum kept on, going on the positive side. And even though the governments want to move away from the Paris Agreement, we have seen the business people and civil society and some of even the leading politicians coming forward and, push the support towards Paris Agreement, which I see a very positive momentum, which without which we couldn't have discussed about Paris Agreement after 5 years. So that's the positive side.
So you take it positively.
Exactly.
You take it positively.
Yes, yes. And there are, of course, there are certain things we need to push, but we have a start. And but then I'll go to the response for what you have mentioned. What has happened even after the
I'll come to those responses. I'll come to the responses, but let us go to Farah first to take her opinion. Farah, you've heard the other panelists. In what side Ranga is positive, and I think the earlier two were cautiously optimistic. What's your point?
Well, then, evening in Paris is always beautiful.
Oh, and absolutely. It's such a beautiful city. Such a beautiful city.
Yeah, it comes with its own parks and beauty and energy. But I mean, we all wanted the Paris Agreement. We had reached a point where this was something to enable us to move for the next 10 years, you know. So that was critical. It had its weaknesses, or it had certain, shall we say, it didn't meet all the aspirations. But what I found, it did give a certain momentum. You know, people came back, the parties came back and said, okay, here's the Paris Agreement. This is what we signed up to, and this is what we're going to do, and started moving somewhat. Now, if our expectations were that the world would change overnight, that's not going to happen. There's a whole lot of actors and stakeholders there. And I mean, I would echo what my friends have said earlier, that, you know, America thought that it would take this stunt, but it didn't work. Because countries, other members of the parties, they were very keen to act on it. Absolutely. Even very slowly, but it started. But we have this picture, and then of course the other picture, which is we're still digging up and burning fossil fuels. We're still doing infrastructure-based development. We ignoring the environmental and ecological dimensions and the corporate lobby. These are still a powerful stakeholder in it. And I would add to this whole conversation that it did give a kind of a momentum and added certain aspects of gender equity and climate change, but we still have a long way to go. And whether you take it from the perspective of finance, then the climate finance needs an architecture which is gender sensitive, because I am on the Green Climate Fund Advisory Committee of my government. And we can see how it's designed not actually to be inclusive or to support developing countries. It has got so many, you know, inbuilt barriers that it becomes very difficult for the most vulnerable or for the communities or countries to access it. You know, the criteria.
Sorry to interrupt you. Very interesting point that you were saying that inbuilt, the structure is inbuilt in a manner that it really is not going to help those which is meant to be, the most vulnerable countries.
Because you see, most of the time when you put in your applications, it doesn't go through. And it doesn't, you don't get the Green Climate Fund the way it needed to be given. The fund pot wasn't always...
Is it by design? Is it by design, you feel?
To some extent, I would say, because, you know, when you are putting these criteria, it's whether it's the Pacifics or it is the countries like Bangladesh or it is the Maldives or it's in Africa, they may not have such financial structures or governance. So the fund did not come in with the suggestion or a provision that they would help them to overcome that and access it. So it's you know, it's pretty difficult.
Okay, fine. I'll come back to you, but as you said, that evening is Paris is beautiful, but in Paris you see Eiffel Tower being all lit up, and also if you go to the fringe areas of Paris in the shadowy metro rail, you get all those people who should not be there. So Paris is a very expensive
city. It's difficult
very expensive.
The average person to survive.
Absolutely. So let us go back to Ulka again. And Ulka, I think the panel is more or less kind of in a one line that is, yes, something has happened after Paris, may not be enough, may not be adequate. I'll bring COVID into the discussion, but that's later. Before that, let me share with all of you, I think you are all aware, but let me share with all of you three reports that have come up in the last week. Yesterday itself, the carbon budget report. The carbon budget report, if I'm actually quoting from my own article, I shared that with you, the Telegraph article today, that the carbon emissions are expected to decline approximately 2.4 billion tons of carbon dioxide in 2020. That is 7% drop, a record drop. And the decrease in 2020 emission appears more pronounced in US, EU, India, but China is very strangely, the decline is only minus 1.7%. And but at the same time, that report saying that the cuts in global emissions of the order of 1 to 2 billion tons of CO2 are needed each year between 2020 and 2030 to limit climate change in line with the Paris Agreement goal. And if you tag that with the emission gap report, it says that the world is still heading for a temperature rise in excess of 3 degrees centigrade this century, despite the COVID-induced dip. And if you go to the Climate Change Performance Index report, it is saying that none of the countries, despite COVID, are on track for Paris. So that's not a very happy situation. That's not a very happy situation for million and billion who expect the leaders and the countries to lead. So what's your point on those reports?
I think the reports have highlighted a very clear fact, which is that this COVID-induced dip in emissions is temporary. It has not fundamentally changed anything, either structurally in the way we produce or behaviorally in the way we consume. It was a kind of enforced limit. Absolutely. So unless we make any real changes, we will compensate for this dip and carry on with the business as usual. But I want to highlight a couple of things. The reason why China's emissions dip has been less is because the industrial activity resumed earlier than it has in other countries. So it just shows how nothing has really changed. So if you look at the stimulus packages that are being now put out in order to support this economic recovery, for every $3 that is going into fossil fuel energy, only $2 is going into clean energy. So what we are doing is we are not really going all out for a clean or a green economic recovery. And that's why we are heading back towards the path that we were on originally. So that's on the production side. On the consumption side, if you see again the UNEP emissions gap report, it says that the richest 1% of the world are producing 15% of the emissions. And the poorest 50% are producing only 7% of the emissions. So here again, there is a need for drastic behavioral change and limitation of the consumption of the richest. And I would argue even the upper middle class. Otherwise, we are back on the same kind of trajectory.
Okay. So unless these are being done, we are not having much hope. And I'll come to that question in the final stages, that what do you expect in the Glasgow to happen? But let's go to Manjit and then to all of the panelists. That what's your take on this report? Manjit, what do you feel about these reports?
Yeah, I agree. They have presented the reality, and I think it's good to have these reports every after interval to check the status, remind government, remind private sector, and all in terms of where we are. In some cases, in terms of finance, the report, not specific to these reports, but in overall, they may not present the reality. But and I think there has been also the case where the broader civil society has questioned in terms of the finance flow and the excess. But particularly, I think in terms of the emissions, my main message would be what I said earlier. What we have seen recently are the long-term announcement that wants to do in terms of the immediate action, and the economic slowdown because of COVID is a temporary situation. But it has also given us a tremendous opportunity for many of our countries to lead our development and not to follow the same path that many of the developed countries, the Western world, has done in past. But if we start looking at the immediate region, because the context that we are, the democracy that we have, the political party who is in a power, who wants a return within their term in the power within that 5 years. If we start looking at those short-term measures, then obviously many of our government will be heading towards reviving the coal industry, looking forward with the coal.
That's been happening. That has been happening around.
It will not make investment in terms of long-term clean energy. So I think the reports are there. We have the UNEP emission gap report, and these reports are the series that we have also seen in past. But I think the key now is to realize them, implement them, the message coming from these reports, and look for the longer term solution as well.
Absolutely. In fact, that's a very important point, and we need to kind of further delve on it. But just before I go to Ranga, just a quick supplementary question. You said that these predictions or the projections are very long term. Do you feel it's time that these projections need to be kind of subdivided? When somebody is saying by 2050 will be zero emission, he or that country needs to say what will happen by 2030, maybe 35. So you can have a train. You just cannot jump to a zero emission by 2050. We have to have a process inbuilt, as you said, the political system and all this. So perhaps it makes sense. For example, the global stock take, you can correct me, I think it's about 2023. So if the global stock take is 2023, in 2023, the countries are legally they have to announce their whatever the next emission cut. So it's too far away. What I'm talking, already we have given a 5 years holiday since Paris. Actually, the Paris Agreement starts executing. We are discussing the Paris, but it actually on board starts implementing from 2021. So it's not a long term. So do you need the short term goals?
Yeah, so just to, I think, respond, the answer is already there in the Paris Agreement itself. Ranga presented earlier, comparing with the Kyoto Protocol. So in the Paris Agreement, we have a process called Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC, where the government can present their next 5-year plan. That the timeline is still being discussed, and those plans will be reviewed. So now, actually, it was a turn for the government to present a targets for 2025 up to 2030.
Exactly. So need to subdivide the targets.
Yeah, which will be reviewed in 2023, and then again they will get a guidance to enhance it further. But as I was saying earlier, there is also a process called long-term strategies that the countries will be presenting for 2050, which will present a vision for countries to implement this immediate plan up to 2030. But what we have seen now is there are many governments who have announced a net zero emission, but there is less in terms of to take emission towards the net zero in the short term.
So, exactly, so that's what I'm saying. Absolutely, I completely agree with you.
Rise in the middle, and which will not be helpful. Yeah,
absolutely. Ranga, if you look at the Paris Agreement, there are so many kind of indicators, but the main 2 points, Ranga, is that the world needs to limit the temperature rise within 2 degrees centigrade, preferably 1.5 degrees centigrade. That was the first goal. And second is that the most countries should reach the global peaking of the GHG should be as soon as possible. Now, these two are the basic premises of Paris Agreement. Now, if you look at the result, the UNEP report saying that we are on course for a 3-degree rise. And also the global peaking is not very clear. As Manjit said, that announcements more to say. So under this situation, in the context of the report, what do you feel that how the kind of process should roll on from now, Glasgow and beyond, Ranga?
Yeah, first I think I need to endorse Manjit. We have a process set, but the recent report has clearly mentioned that things are not clear. It's very vague.
So you think the process should be there? There should be a process.
Yes, the process should be clear. And I think one of the key important thing is that the Paris Agreement implementation responsibility is not only with the government. All the other stakeholders need to come on board and start implementing. It's the private sector, individuals, the civil society, everybody needs to come together. But what we have seen is that the engagement space at the global implementation level and the national level and the subnational level must be enhanced. I think almost all the countries and all the regions are experiencing that the engagement space is limited. And it might go hand in hand with the level of awareness. And some about the priorities, probably sometimes the economic priorities are there, some of the other short-term, the political priorities might be coming into place. So one important thing is that we need to make sure that we remove barriers of the engagement of the stakeholders. Make sure that they are not driven by some of the short-term negatively reinforcing the processes. I'll give an example. In most of the countries, take the COVID pandemic, the government spend is for about maximum 5 to 6 years, and they need to face an election. So the system itself has driven the system towards short-term goals. Yes. And they are not going for long-term goals. So they are looking at the short-term. So there is an inherent system negativity that we need to address. And I think all the people who are advocating towards implementing the Paris Agreement has faced this challenge. I think it's our role to understand this rather than confronting with all these the political parties saying that, or the country political leaders saying that you're not doing adequately. We need to understand their mindset as well, right? I think we need to come up with a practical strategy how to remove their barriers in their mindset, their barriers.
By we, who you mean? Who should have the strategy?
We are the people who are committed towards Paris Agreement, and we always push the positive movements towards Paris.
But Ranga, is the countries who are the parties. They have signed it. So yeah, they are the primary stakeholder, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, but sorry, Ranga, to interrupt, but in this global system, countries do not work on their own. There are so many external influences. Exactly. And, whether it's the microfinancial institutions, whether it is your bilateral relations, whether it's your regional relations, they all play into it.
Okay, yeah. Let's Ranga make his point and come to Farah again.
Yeah, I'll just pause there in my that comment, but at the same time, I will again say something positive. Positive is that certain global decisions have realized that the political decisions might not work alone toward this. There should be some sort of a practical, and one of the areas is trade. Green Deal, where they're trying to, influence the trade system using the consumption-driven trade, the barriers and kind of instruments, where the countries who wants to target at the EU trade, the market, wants to move towards some sort of a steps, not only climate change positive stuff, but mostly about the ecosystem and the climate change related aspects. I think those kind of initiatives are required from the global leaders.
Okay.
Not
global
only
leaders mean global political leaders, you mean?
Exactly.
Global political leaders.
Exactly.
Okay. I understand the point. And it also makes sense that private sectors play a huge role in the entire overall economy. Private sector plays a very huge role. But having said that, the rider is the public sectors always guides the private sector movement. If Donald Trump has a particular policy in public sector that predominantly guides the policy in the private sector. If Narendra Modi in India has certain amount of policy, when he's having the pro-solar policy, the big corporates are going for solar because the government is giving incentives and other support system to that. So though private sector has to play a role, but the rider is the public sector has to be showing the proper direction. Unless that happens, the public sector will not go, because public sectors will only go there where there is some kind of money return component is there. So fine, that's very interesting way of looking at things. So
and business wants regulatory certainty, right? Business wants regulatory certainty. Otherwise, they can't function.
Yes.
So yeah,
let's come to Farah now. Farah, you heard, I think there's no point in repeating what's being talked, but very interesting point that had come up, that now the long targets being pitched in. That's very important. By 2050, the vision of the country to be kind of zero emission by 2050. That's brilliant. But we need to have the shorter targets and also perhaps the decentralized targets. Maybe the Dhaka Municipal Corporation needs to have a target, what is going to happen by 2030. Ditto for Kolkata, ditto for Colombo, and likewise. So, but in our country, in India, Ulka can kind of pitch in there, that in India, at least now, we don't have any subnational policy per se. There are various policies being framed, but these are only theories. So don't you think that now the time is up for the countries to roll down this emission cut down from the national level to the subnational level and maybe in the city level? What's your point on that? Farah?
I don't know about many countries, but in South Asia, there is still that psychology and mindset of central control. And whereas when I lived in the UK, I saw how the devolution helped Scotland come up with its own policy and Wales come up with its own policy. It wasn't necessarily easy, but they had greater targets. So when you compare in the UK, compare England and Scotland, you will find the emission targets or actions taken they're ahead of their English brothers and sisters. So that has probably been possible in countries where such practices are there. And I couldn't agree more with you that it needs to be brought down, or it needs to be decentralized and taken to players and actors who can implement on the ground. And so the municipalities, city corporations, they need to have policies. But I would add here that we have a 5-year planning. And in that 5-year plans, we are putting in shorter term targets. Now, the point here is whether there is global targets and the national, because we function sometimes very disjointly. Our political actors are much more concerned with the being on the global stage and signing up and talking about the rhetorics. But when it comes to bringing it back home and then starting to unpack and implement, then it's a slightly different approach or package. And I would say that we have done a lot of advocacy. And if you come to Bangladesh, there's definitely success, because today Bangladesh hosts the Climate Vulnerable Forum. It is the Center for Adaptation, and that's a good 15 years of hard work, starting from people like Dr. Khalikuzaman to Dr. Salim ul Haq and us. So that is years and years of that. But this is the same government, when it talks about its budget, it is today saying that 70% of these initiatives has to be funded by the private sector. Now, does the private sector really understand? I mean, they probably understand, but have they necessarily internalized and started to develop the business plan? So this is why we are doing a lot of work around risk planning, because businesses are not going to be standing when there is repeated floods. You lose the market, you lose your customers, you lose the infrastructure, you lose the energy source. There's so many. So we're trying to get that discourse and the orientation with the private sector. Like right now, I'm working on a project which is working with the private sector, the Dhaka Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and working around the issues of earthquake. What could happen to Dhaka?
Okay.
So that shift needs to be made.
But Farah, one point is, as I think you also mentioned, that very interesting that in our political system, in the mostly in South Asia, the governments are elected for 5 years. That's a normal process. I think all countries, I think Sri Lanka, Nepal are all 5 years tenure. So be it a city government or a state government or a national government, they normally don't look beyond those 5 years. Even in India, we have the 5 years plan. So if you don't internalize that within your climate action, then I think it's difficult for any political party to think beyond 20 years we don't have that kind of wisdom, I believe, in South Asian perspective.
Yes, but Jayanta, what is also very interesting that our government now has a 100-year Delta plan. So we are seeing an impact of all this conversation, advocacy, lobbying.
Let me be very blunt, Farah. Are these plans coming out because some multinational agencies are kind of pushing them, or is it the government itself come out with the plan? I'm not casting any doubt on everything. It's
a combination. It is definitely a combination, because when you develop a 100-year Delta plan, then Netherlands, UK, India, America, everybody sees a business potential. So I'm not going to separate them, but at least there is a vision coming. There is some action thinking instead of just the 5-year plan.
Absolutely.
So there is a new trend starting.
Okay, great. I think the next round of questions, let us hear about the country position. With 2021 Glasgow, God willing, will be coming up in scheduled time in 2021. What the different South Asian countries in their context are thinking about how to go ahead? What's your point of view? Let me start with Ulka. Ulka, you have heard about this decentralized planning discussion. Now, you sure are aware that in India, the central government had asked the state governments to prepare the climate action plan, the state action plan. And I know for sure that various states have prepared those plans, and the plans are now somewhere in the south block or north block, in the back room, some garbage almirah and back of it. So it's like that, because in West Bengal itself, 36,500 crores INR, Indian money was a plan. But nobody after that have any discussion from where the money will come, who will give the money, and how the state will go ahead. So that's the situation for most states. So having that, so what's your think? How you think that India will proceed in Glasgow, or what the India's position will be regarding these issues? Very briefly, India's point.
Thanks, Jayanta. You've raised a number of questions, and let me try to say 3 things, right? One is, you're absolutely right that the state action plans were focused more on adaptation actions, and the states weren't really given a mandate to translate the national NDC target into state level kind of targets. But if you look at what has happened on the renewable energy side, states have vied with each other, whether it is a Gujarat on solar, rooftop solar in particular, or Tamil Nadu on wind energy in particular. This state action has supported the private action, just as you were all discussing in the previous round. I want to just state a couple of facts over here. One is, if you look back at the International Energy Agency's projections over the last few years, they thought that renewable energy will become commercial and reach the scale it has. It'll take 36 years. Instead, it has taken only 6 years. But going forward, even though sometimes technological and commercial developments happen faster than we can foretell, going forward, that pace has to accelerate even more. And the kind of progress that has been made on RE globally needs to be 6 times faster if we are to have any hope of meeting the Paris goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the states have a very important role to play, especially in India, where energy, electricity, as you know, is a state subject. And where recognizing the water, energy, food nexus, again, there is a lot of potential for states to implement actions regarding groundwater pumping, many such things. The other point that you had raised even earlier was around even further decentralization of the city scale. And again, you know, compared to the cities of the United States, where the mayor is all powerful, where rules can be made, you know, like in cities in California said, we will not have new fossil fuel electricity. We will procure only green materials for building our public. We don't have that kind of power. Yet there is a process in place, or rather I would say evolving, spearheaded not by the MOEFCC, but the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, to develop, you know, these smart cities into climate smart cities. Now, by no means is this a perfect program. It is still relatively new, but that seed of thought has been planted, that there's no point in having simply, you know, a veneer of infrastructure based on Internet of Things if there isn't underlying ecological resilience, if we are not, you know, sort of addressing climate resilience. So that process has started. But I want to say a third thing, which kind of again ties up to your previous discussion of the short-term policies to make those long-term vision, you know, achievable. which is, if you look at what Canada has announced just yesterday, they have announced a more stringent carbon tax. They have increased their carbon tax and said that it will go on increasing every year till it reaches $170. And they have learned from the lesson where they faced in the past where the states did not agree. And this time they are going only with federal action. So I would flip it and say that there are some things that the central government can do that the states or the cities cannot do. And we must take advantage of that as well.
And what's your position on the India's position in Glasgow? Very clearly, India has said that we are not going to talk about the emission, more ambitious emission card. That will already clearly being communicated. So, any point on that, Ulka?
So your guess is as good as mine, Jayanta. I'm sure you're better informed than I am. But yes, the public position until this morning, I'm waiting for the Prime Minister to speak at the Climate Ambition Summit, which can be, but otherwise the position has been that we are aligned with, what is required.
We are on target.
And the other countries should take more action. But I'm sort of given a lot of hope, again, by the recent announcements, where the EU has increased its target to 55% by 2030, a cut of 55% from 1990 levels by just 10 years, which is pretty ambitious.
10 years,
UK has said 68% again by 2030. So we're not talking 2050 net zero.
They are talking much shorter term.
Now, UK has also said we are not going to fund any new fossil fuel investments even outside our country. So not even through our development aid. Denmark has said we are not going to explore for any new oil and gas.
That will have a rub off to the
exactly.
Other parts,
and with the Biden presidency and the US coming back, I'm hoping that in general, the sentiment will change.
Okay. I remember when I keep on saying this, when COP that I covered, then I covered all of them till the last one. And in Copenhagen, it was termed Copenhagen, because there was so much hope that all the leaders coming and they will find the solution like this, but it didn't happen like that. But yes, there are positive points. And let's first hear Ranga. Ranga, what's Sri Lanka? How Sri Lanka will proceed, or about what's your take on that as an expert in the Glasgow COP? What is Sri Lanka's position, you feel?
Yeah, I think I can give my personal point of view because I'm not engaged with
it's the analytics point.
Yeah, well, I think Sri Lanka is in a better position compared to when they were announcing the INDCs. I think most of the countries were not quite clear about what this NDC means and how to integrate strategically into their overall sustainable development plans, and how to gauge their own capacities and how to link it with the conditional and unconditional targets. I think Sri Lanka has come a long way in that sense and have understood clearly. And I think the updated NDCs, which will be announced very soon, looks pretty good. Where it's more participatory, where they have engaged the subnational government.
When the changed INDC can come up for Sri Lanka? When do you expect that to happen?
Early next year, in January, we expect to submit it in January.
So before Glasgow, much before Glasgow.
It's going to be before Glasgow. That's what I heard. Okay. But I'm not quite sure. I'm just giving.
No, that's a kind of popular thinking.
Yes. So I think most of the countries are in the same way. I can give examples beyond as well. And what we have seen is that their understanding about the NDCs, how strategically integrate into the rest of their sustainable development action has gone, quite significantly high. But I think where we have failed is to identify the opportunities to capitalize on that. Some of the political leaders and the institutions have failed that, but I think we need to support and provide good case studies.
That's politics. That's politics. You can't help it. Okay, great. I think Sri Lanka is as you said, quite a kind of forward-looking plan. As you said, they're going to talk about the more ambitious plan. So first to Manjit, what do you think about in Nepal? Nepal in any way is not contributing much, but still, what's Nepal's position in Glasgow?
Yeah. So this week we submitted our updated NDC. I think the only country in the South Asia who have
What do you have submitted?
Updated NDC. So it's a next, yeah. So the new NDC, the first one that was submitted in 2016. So we updated the targets.
How much difference was with respect to the earlier one?
Yeah, so the document is there in the website. The Prime Minister is also will be making some additional announcement. I think in an hour from now. For the first time, the country have declared to go carbon neutral by 2050. The plans are still being worked out, but that's a vision. Compared to the previous NDC, more sectors are covered, all the IPCC sectors. And as Ranga was pointing out, we kind of worked hard to find what opportunities that we can have. And also we want to change the narrative that, yes, adaptation is the priority, but what on adaptation itself? Because it's about the funding gap that we have. Only highlighting adaptation doesn't mean what actually our need is. So the framing is the more there is mitigation, with more responsibility to major emitters, but also what we can contribute, the less we have to adopt. And that means there will be less funding need. In terms of the opportunities, we have set the target in terms of clean energy, 15,000 megawatt of clean energy in next 10 years. There are targets in terms of electric vehicle, both public and private. The targets in the first NDC in terms of forest cover was 40% of the total country. This time it has raised to 45%. Then there are a lot of other policy targets, including a tourism industry to make it carbon neutral and more. There is also an adaptation section to highlight the adaptation needs and the loss and damage needs in the country. And also this time we have kind of calculated the cost need for Nepal's NDC, which is $25 billion US dollar, to implement the mitigation target. And under that 25 billion US dollar, we also have allocated around 3 billion from the national treasury. So we are not saying that we want we only want a support from international community, but we also have a role to play. So I would frame it in a way that a country has shown a leadership, has also kind of positively given an indication to other countries to come forward, bring more ambition, and those countries with the capacity and with higher emission be responsible.
Okay, great. Very quickly to Farah, Bangladesh, what's Bangladesh position and Bangladesh is thinking about, Farah?
Bangladesh is definitely trying to take a leadership on the climate side, and it has taken the position. Our Prime Minister has said that all countries should submit their NDCs by the 31st of December. So even as the COP did not happen in Glasgow, it's been pushed, but this is something that, and it has, as I said, set up the Climate Vulnerable Forum here, and it is talking about solar energy. It's talking about all those efforts to cut down on the emissions. But our emissions are at such a low level. But what is not yet adequate, or where we, civil society and climate model is still dependent on the traditional energy models, and that transition, it's talking about the solar energy, but when we see how this is panning out, that balance needs to be more strengthened, and in fact in the phasing out towards that. And one of our problems is always been that this is a country of 170 million people, and it needs energy, and you can't provide that level of energy, education, healthcare, and all that with just overnight, converting to renewable. So this is the argument that comes from the government side. From our side, we're saying, no, you have to make those efforts. You have to get the private sector to invest in it. You need to get your development partners to come forward with it. And another critical part is protecting the resources like the Sundarbans, our rivers, coastal areas. That's also an important aspect. So we are seeing action on that. We've seen the High Court ruling where all this encroachment on the rivers are now being removed, and so these are efforts that happen at the national level. And of course, Sheikh Hasina goes at the global arena, and she's demanding greater emphasis, greater investment in climate action.
So what's Bangladesh's expectation from Glasgow?
Bangladesh definitely wants to see greater impetus and also wants to highlight on the issues of three. One is the climate vulnerable forums and those affected. Then the disaster, the displacement and climate displacement issues. And I think loss and damage is definitely something, because,
and also definitely Bangladesh seeks more international support, financial support for implementation.
It's more about, it's not so much in terms of the compensation argument. It's more about responsibility and then
historical responsibility of
and also technical and capacity building. That's an important, and technological transfer without conditions.
That's the long drawn issue. That's the long drawn issue. Absolutely. Very quickly, we are coming to the end of the program, but let's quickly go to Ulka. Ulka, very interesting. Apart from India, I know that India is a different case study altogether. We are having so many people, this huge population. India is definitely elephant in the room in South Asia. But with Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all coming up with the modified NDCs. So do you think that it is going to put pressure on the Indian government to come up with something? May not be exactly in terms of cutting down emission, but including more sectors. That Farah very beautifully pointed out that Bangladesh is adding more kind of, also I think Manjit has pointed out that Nepal is adding more sectors into it. So what's your take on that, Ulka? Is it going to put pressure on India?
So let me put it this way, Jayanta. India has always had more ambitious domestic policies than it has
the most ambitious domestic policy
Paris Agreement, right, under the international commitment.
Absolutely.
So definitely the scope exists. This 450 gigawatt Central Electricity Authority's optimal generation mix is something that the country is aiming towards, but we have not promised it to the world as part of the Paris Agreement. In terms of pressure, I would say I was just seeing that China has made a recent, just now they have made an announcement saying that by 2030, they will cut their emissions by 65% from 2005 levels.
So that's even more pressure on India.
This is beyond the September announcement by the Chinese government. So certainly there are all kinds of pressures, but I would say there are so many opportunities that exist. You spoke about the sectors. Transport is such a major sector where, as you know, our NDC is an overarching NDC. It doesn't give sectoral targets. There is a lot of potential within transport. I would say the MSME and even large industry as well as small industry, there's massive potential for industrial energy efficiency.
There are options, there are scopes for inclusion.
So I would say two things. One is there is new infrastructure that all of our countries are building, right? We are unique in the sense that we have cities are yet to be built, transportation networks are yet to be built, electricity has to be provided. We can choose to do so in a low carbon way rather than a high carbon way, and hopefully the clean finance will come. Okay. Second is where the old infrastructure needs to be phased out. There the issue is that of just transition, as it's being called, which is you may create new green jobs in the new sectors, but who are those jobs accessible to? Where are they? For example, you may phase out a coal power plant in Jharkhand and a wind energy project comes up in Tamil Nadu. That doesn't really help in terms of the locals getting jobs. So that's a big issue. And the third is the details of how. We know at a macro level what can be done, but at a detailed level, do we go in for large-scale solar parks, or can we give a greater thrust to rooftop solar photovoltaic?
Absolutely.
So details like that. Similarly for MSMEs, I think there's a lot of
that's great. I think that's very, very, very kind of insightful. Before I wind up, let's go to Ranga. Very quick. Ranga, need to be very quick on this. That See, all this being talked about, and you know that South Asian countries really need financial, technological, and other supports, including India, I believe, because there are a lot to be, and I think the annexed countries have this historical responsibility to support because they have contributed this emission. But having said that, finance is the key. Unless we do get money, in fact, my editor says, end of every COP, that why you guys are going, you are writing the same copy that the developed countries are not going any money. So what's the point? That's we keep on repeating and repeating and repeating. The GCF doesn't have enough money. The Global Adaptation Fund doesn't have enough money. So Ranga, is this narrative going to change with COVID there very quickly? Ranga.
No, narrative won't change. It won't
very
change.
hopeful, Ranga.
No, it won't change. It will
change. Okay.
Right. So the one of the reasons is that this is something very interesting that we need to look into. Even though most of the developed countries are moving towards carbon neutrality targets, I think they have ambitious targets. And none of them are been talking about the financial the flows that they're expecting to provide towards climate change. And this is definitely going to be a challenging topic because if you look at the announcements coming from the government with regards to their economic contraction and their support towards the ODA is being reduced. So that's a kind of a signal that we are getting that the news is not going to be favorable towards climate finance.
Okay, absolutely. One question, one line answer from all of you. Maybe I start from Ranga, is that Glasgow will be a success? Will Glasgow be a success or average? What you feel?
I think it's an average. It's based on our gauge, but from my gauge, I think it's
realistically it's an average. It will be an average call.
I think because most of the parties will be starting talking about COVID-19, definitely.
Okay, so that will be the dominant discussion point.
Yes.
Okay. So a new alibi has come up on board. So Manjit, what's your point? Glasgow, what's the point? Success, failure, or average?
I think two things. One, Glasgow is long away next year. There's a summit happening now. The prime ministers and the head of state are making their announcement. I think much action has to happen now. If you situation facing the blunt of climate change, we cannot wait for another year every time. The second point is the action has to be happen at the domestic level. Glasgow is somewhere we all get together and
absolutely
and it's a family photo and making an announcement, but the action has to happen at home.
Okay, Farah?
COVID, new challenges like plastic and water, and this has really come up during COVID. Health challenges. So Glasgow has different challenges from other COPs. So I am thinking we need different indicators to measure the success part of it. In terms of the usual, it'll be on the average side. But in terms of the future, because we're coming with this pandemic, it needs to provide much more relevant leadership.
Okay.
Not the old one.
So it's a new ball game. It will be a new ball game, you feel. It's a new ball game with the COVID inbuilt. Great. Ulka, what's your point? What do you think? Glasgow, what's in store for us?
I would say that the UK, the EU, and now the US.
UK is really trying. Even the High Commission in Kolkata has been regularly interacting and saying that how we can make it successful from these ends. So yes, you're right. The UK is very, very keen. Yes,
they seem determined to make it a success, especially, it will be the first COP that Joe Biden will attend as a president. John Kerry will be there, from the...
And also after Brexit.
So they seem determined, but I think the point that the panelists have made, which is we have to keep our eyes so that long-term vision can be made.
Very important. That has come up from today's discussion. I think many, many thanks to all of you. It's a wonderful discussion. I have learned a lot, and I think you must have enjoyed it. I believe you have enjoyed it. And the only point I think that, yes, I agree with all of your contention that perhaps COVID by default has contributed to turnaround, but the governments need to work on this turnaround to make it sustainable, more permanent. and perhaps this new political angles with Joe Biden coming to the picture and US joining again, and also the Brexit and everything, and UK's keenness to make it a successful COP after relative failure of Madrid will all contribute to a very interesting development during the Glasgow. We are all looking ahead to Glasgow, but I'll end up with this particular point. I think on a wider scale, perhaps another day we'll discuss at length on this, unless climate change is mainstream with the environmental consideration, it is very, very difficult to get a very keen road ahead. I know in political leaderships across India, at least, they consider the environment and climate change very separately. So good action on climate change makes good action on environment, on air pollution, everything. That has not been considered always. So perhaps the time has come when we need to link climate change with the wider environmental situation. Farah was talking about the High Court taking actions in Bangladesh. I know in India, it must be in Sri Lanka and Nepal as well. So finger crossed, COVID has contributed a lot. COVID has also done some good things, so that we are doing this kind of program. Otherwise, we might not have thought about it. But again, finger crossed, and let us expect and let us see how it goes. 5 years and a beautiful evening in Paris has generated the Paris Agreement. Now, 5 years down the line, it may not be looking that beautiful, but Glasgow coming, who knows? Paris is an interesting city. Thank you. We conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayanta and everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.